Hey everybody, welcome back to the Modern Trumpeter Podcast. I'm very excited for today's guest as she is one of the most notable members of some of the top premier military bands and is highly regarded in the Broadway and New York scene. Today we get to speak with Liesl Whitaker. Liesl is a professional trumpet player specializing in lead and commercial playing. She has performed for numerous Broadway productions, including Some Like It Hot, Mr. Saturday Night, starring Billy Crystal, and many others. She's recently retired from the U.S. Army, where she played lead trumpet for both the Army Blues and the Jazz Ambassadors for nearly 21 years. Liesl was the first female to win and hold this position in any premier military jazz ensemble, a feat she accomplished twice for each group. Prior to her military service, she lived and worked in New York City as a Broadway and commercial trumpet player. She has toured all over the world throughout her career and is an original member of the Diva Jazz Orchestra. Throughout her career, she has performed with artists including Nancy Wilson, Clark Terry, the Maria Schneider Jazz Orchestra, the WDR Big Band, Joe Lovano, the Manhattan Transfer, Al Jarreau, Maurice Hines, James Brown, Patrick Williams, Diane Scher, Judy Collins, and many others. And as always, we want to let our listeners know that we are in the process of writing a book called The Modern Trumpeter, a guide to building a versatile and successful career. This book will be the go-to guide for trumpet players to know how to start preparing for and building their careers within music. With insights and stories from over 60 professional trumpet players working in the business, this book will cover topics such as how to find gigs, the importance of relationships, how to prepare for specific musical opportunities, education, teaching, recording, summer camps, and a host of other need-to-know subjects to help you be successful in a career in music. You can find us and get more updates by following us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Modern Trumpeter. You can also visit our website, moderntrumpeter.com, for more information, as well as get on our mailing list. The book is expected to be completed at the end of 2026. If you like this podcast, please share it with a friend and comment your favorite moments or stories from this episode below. And now, here is my interview with Liesl Whitaker. Hey, everybody. Welcome back again to the Modern Trumpeter Podcast. Today, we get to speak with Liesl Whitaker. Liesl, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us today.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for asking me.
So, to get going, can you first tell us a little bit about your first experiences with the trumpet and the moment you knew you wanted to pursue it as a career?
Well, my first experiences with the trumpet were, I was completely self-taught. I switched over to French horn when I was in high school or 8th grade or something like that. I only switched over because I went to a small private Catholic school that ended up being so small that it ended up closing because of lack of enrollment. And we had literally one trumpet player in the band. And he was the nicest kid, but he couldn't play the trumpet, so I thought I could play better than him. So I stole my brother's trumpet, taught myself how to play from French horn, and challenged him, and that's how I became a trumpet player. It was purely ego-driven because I thought I could do it better. So, and also because in the 8th grade, the French horn parts were pretty boring for me at that time. So I was bored. And that's not to say that French horn is boring. It's actually one of the hardest instruments that you can choose. I just thought I could be a better trumpet player than this kid. And so, like I said, completely ego-driven, self-centered, but that's how I ended up being a trumpet player.
That is the best trumpet origin story I think I've ever heard. That's awesome. That's
true.
And so what happened then? You became the first trumpet, and then it stuck, obviously. What kind of happened next?
Yeah, it stuck. My parents moved me from that small town into a larger area where I no longer was like the only trumpet player. I was one of about 30, and so I ended up having to challenge my way up from the very bottom chair because that's how high school worked back then. I don't know if it still works like that these days, where you have to challenge your way up to the top chair. And then I just kept playing. I guess you could say I made a conscious decision in a way that I became a music major, but honestly, it was just the best thing that I was good at. I never saw it. I never saw a life where I wasn't playing the trumpet. And so it just kind of turned into a career for me. It wasn't like I heard a bunch of great players and was like, oh, I want to be like that. It wasn't the case at all because I was completely self-taught. It just was something I really loved to do. And the career kind of unfolded for me. And all those things that you mentioned in that little pre-talk of those little gigs, I've done all of that stuff as in a way to make a living over the years to support myself. And all of that is part of the process, I believe, in becoming a professional. Is throwing yourself into as many fires as possible and extracting any learning moment musically and otherwise from those things that you can take to the next scenario, the next step. It's kind of an ongoing, add little things to it as you go until you become a better and better player. And then for me, and I think for a lot of people, the path kind of, well, maybe I can't speak for a lot of people, but for me, it really just kind of unfolded in front of me, really, because of those choices. So
Yeah, well, and I'm excited to dig into all of that stuff here. So if we're running a timeline here, you never really considered doing anything else, but also it just kind of happened because it was what you were the best at. How did that influence your decision of like where to go to school and like did you graduate with a degree? Did you get a master's? Let's kind of talk about formal education.
well, formal education, my parents, when I said they moved me from that little school, that was little schools in Kansas, they moved me to North Carolina, a little bit bigger community. And at the time, by the time it came time for me to graduate, I was looking to go to school and get any kind of scholarship I could. And so I got a scholarship to the local college. Well, it wasn't local, it's 2 hours from my home, but at Appalachian State University in North Carolina, they gave me a full scholarship to go study there. And that's how I was able to go to school. Full disclosure, I never graduated. I left school early because I had an opportunity to audition for a band in New York, and I won the audition and then just threw myself into the New York fire right away. And so that became my school. So I don't have a college degree, quite honestly.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so, and maybe going that route a little bit. So obviously you've had a phenomenal career and you're still going, and you haven't had the degree. And there's several players that are also in a similar boat where they haven't finished a degree and they're doing great. What are your thoughts on for young players as far as schooling goes? Is it important? Should they seek that? Should they be doing a master's, doctorate, or how can it influence their career?
Well, there's a lot of ways to answer that. Right now, we're in a kind of funny world that we're living in right now. So for me, the college scene academically, it wasn't that I intended not to finish. I had a lot of family stuff going on at home that forced me to go in and out of school. I had to drop out and go deal with being a caretaker for my parents. Things like that crept up. For me, it was a great opportunity. I'm not saying that that's the best way for everybody, but the doors open differently for everybody. And so for me, the doors that opened were always a direct result of the choice I had made before. That doesn't mean that there's a right choice. It just means that for me, it worked out. There are some people that go get their full, they go to school, they go get their undergrad, they get their master's, they get their doctorate, and they do fine. They teach music. Well, they go perform, whatever. Everybody has different doors that open. But for me, I never turned down an opportunity in college to play. And I get really kind of frustrated with professors that kind of cement their students into the academia all the time. You're in school to learn how to play the instrument. And if you have an opportunity to go play the instrument and make money, I believe you need to explore that. And I really think that professors should do everything they can to accommodate that if that's what the student is majoring in, if it's a performance degree or whatever, because that experience is what you draw from. Like I said, all those experiences that I had as a younger person playing in all those different scenarios gave me information of how to be a better trumpet player, how to do things differently, how to do things more authentically, what is expected of me as a professional, and how do I take care of my personal professional business, because there is a business side to being a musician. You have to answer the phone, you have to communicate with people, you have to show up on time, you have to wear the right thing, you have to be able to get along with people. All those things are part of the business and your business, your particular business. And so when we go on gigs, we learn about that. We even learn some things that maybe we learn from other people and from their mistakes. I've been on gigs where people were constantly late, and after a while, they don't get called again. That's information. That's information for me to learn as a student of the music all the time, and as a student of the music business. You never know what you're going to learn. So I don't put a whole lot of you got to go and get this piece of paper. You must do that. I don't care about a timeline for me personally. And anybody that I talk to that I mentor, if they have some opportunity to go and play and create music or learn from something, I encourage them to do it every time. It doesn't mean you should quit school. It doesn't mean that's not what I'm saying. It's just for me, the opportunities and the doors that opened in a certain way that always led me to something different and something new, some pattern of growth. So everybody's different. I also had a personal thing going on, like I said earlier, with my family, where my mother needed a caretaker at some point. So that was something I had to consider while I was growing up and going to school. Where do I want to be? Do I want to show up for my family? What do I need to do? So everybody has a different story, and there's not a perfect template. There's a lot of ways to get from point A to point B. You don't have to go in a straight shot. And if you've interviewed a lot of people, I'm sure you've heard that, many people have had very, very different paths and they're doing fine, So, and right now, this is a time where, politically, the world's on fire. As a young adult, a young male adult, I think there's a lot of things to consider about being in school right now. I'll just speak between the lines. And so there are some advantages to being in school. And so everybody's different. You just always have to reassess, try to remember what you're taking out of it. Is it going to be advantageous to you? Sometimes the things that we never see coming end up being our biggest informants, in our life. And experiences, eyes wide open kind of is the way I look at it. Go into everything with your eyes wide open, even if you don't want to do it. It might you're going to learn something. You're always going to learn something. So
yeah, that's absolutely. When those opportunities came up for you when you were in school, like how did that happen? Were you actively seeking for those gigs, those opportunities, or were you referred? And how can young players in that age and time of their lives can find similar opportunities?
Well, for me, when I was in Cincinnati in school, I eventually transferred into the University of Cincinnati. When I was there, I went out to the jazz clubs every night. I went out to hear the big band every night. I introduced myself to those trumpet players. I introduced myself to the band leaders and anybody that, just tell them what I'm doing, if I could ever help them out. And eventually, someone will call you. And for me, it ended up being with the Blue West Big Band. I'd go out every Wednesday night, hear the band. I'd hang out long enough and they'd have a few beers and they'd be like, hey, I kind of want to go home. You want to play the second set for me? And I'd just sit in, things like that. That's how I'm not saying I was great. I had the drummer at the time was a guy named John Von Olen, and he was also an instructor at the university. So every time I got to play with him, it was a lesson. And because he was on the faculty, he knew that was important that I play, even if it was rough around the edges, because that's where we cut our teeth, by we learn the most by kind of walking on the gigs and getting our butts kicked,
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. It's like anything. Even doctors, they go to internships. That's how they learn. It's just kind of our little internship to be sitting in with bands and trying to play wherever you can. And that's part of taking care of your business. It's like giving out your business card. So that's how I did it when I was in school. And I was lucky that I had faculty members that also had that same belief that if you're teaching kids to be performers, then you don't deny them the opportunity to perform, even if even if they might miss a test, they might miss a presentation. So you reschedule, you work it out, because that's why they're there. At least that's what I believe. So yeah. I was fortunate that I had people in my corner like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense to me. I think there's certain things about the college and university like setup as far as music goes that it could change. And I think I think you're totally right, where it's like if you want to be a performance major, and you have an opportunity, go to.
Yeah, because kids are going to learn more in that 3-hour performance than they're going to learn sitting in half a semester of your class, and it's just, like I said, you learn a lot from other people's behavior too. And you learn about how other people play. You learn about the things that work for them, the things that they're practicing, what it takes to be, what it kind of shines a light on your own deficiencies when you're playing with better players. And it's always the best scenario when you can be the worst player in a band, because you're always going to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think you're totally right. Let's see. So you never graduated, and so you auditioned for a band in New York. What was that band, and what was that experience and opportunity like?
That was the Diva Jazz Orchestra, all women big band. We auditioned in '92 and I was picked, and it was a great experience. It's been a big part of my story, and I learned a lot, just because I was 23 when I got that gig. And so I was very, very young. I was very, very green and very raw. So being thrown into that, it was an awesome opportunity, because we were a brand new big band. We had people writing just for the band, and we didn't have a sound that we were trying to copy. We were doing our own thing. And what a great situation for a lead player to be able to come into a band and just create a sound, and that's what I got to do. And I realized that, the older I get, that there are not many people that had that opportunity in their lifetimes as trumpet players and lead trumpet players, but I did. And so along with the drummer, we got to shape the entire, sound signature of that band. And that was pretty cool. So I in a way, I couldn't be wrong, because I wasn't being compared to anybody, you know what I mean? So you could just listen to that band and you could know that was us, because we didn't sound like anybody else. That was a great that was a great opportunity. I feel very fortunate to have had that happen to me.
Yeah.
So,
And do you still play with them?
on occasion, I do. I've gotten pretty busy, and it's hard for me to get away. And honestly, it's hard to move a big band. So big bands don't work as much as they used to. I'm talking about like early 90s. This is I'm a little older. So it was a different time back then. It takes a lot of money to move a big band. So they're a rare creature. A good big band that's out touring and everything is hard to find.
Yeah, definitely. Which is unfortunate. I've heard so many stories of some of these older players where they've been on the road with Buddy Rich or Stan Kenton or any of these other big bands, and it's like, man,
Yeah, those days are gone.
It's like it's so unfortunate because that was like how so many people were cutting their teeth back in the day. It was like you get a gig with Woody Herman, you're out on the road, and like that for those 6 months or a year, or like that's how you really got the education. And I'm like, it's
Yeah.
unfortunate that
It
that's
wasn't
not
just
the
a
case.
musical education, but we were also networking with one another. We were meeting people along the way. We were playing together. And one cool thing about Diva was they did it pretty old school. We had a huge book. We must have had, maybe 100 charts. And we never knew from one night to the next what charts would be playing. She would literally make the set list on the bus and we'd play. So it was not unusual to pull up a chart that you hadn't played in 6 months. So it keeps you on your toes, and it made all of us become better players because we always had to be paying attention, and that was important. That was an old school thing. And because, like I said, we had people writing for the band for the first time, they wrote it old school way. There was a time when in Duke's band where you would pull it, there would be a Cat Anderson part, there'd be a Clark Terry part. They didn't say trumpet 1 2 3 4 5. They said Cat, they said Clark on the part, and that's what they did for us. My parts said Liesl on my part. They were written for us specifically, which helped give the band a really unique signature sound too. They played on everybody's strengths. So
That's super cool. And so when from a business standpoint, I guess you get this opportunity to play with the Diva Jazz Orchestra. Moved to New York. Was that like a full-time gig, part-time? Kind of what did you have to do to
well,
make
it was a
living
part-time
else?
gig. It was
Okay.
definitely a part-time gig. Before I was doing cruise ships out there doing that, and just kind of got tired of being on the ship. Diva was not a full-time gig at first. It was definitely very part-time, very sporadic. And I literally, when I first moved to New York, I worked in a bakery, 7 days a week. And I went down to the Union Hall when I first, under the advice of Byron Stripling, I went down to the Union Hall. I handed out my business card back when we used to do business cards. This is before cell phones and all that stuff. And same thing I was talking about. I said, hey, if you ever need somebody for a rehearsal, I'm here. Anybody to sub on a show. Again, word of mouth travels pretty quickly. You get one call, you do a good job, you get 2 calls the next time. And so that's how I broke into the scene. Just being around and you have to be willing to work for no money. And that happens for years. And so unless you have the cash flow, which I didn't, you take other gigs. And you do what you can. It's just like being an actor in New York. They all wait tables and 10 bars and do temp work, on the side until they get a break, until they can support themselves exclusively acting. And we do the same thing as musicians. It's a gig economy. And so you never burn a bridge if you can avoid it. And you might have to do, a lot of other things that wasn't part of the plan when you started, but that makes it into your plan, whether you want it to or not. Again, we're a survival mode at that point, right? So we gotta do what we have to do.
Yeah, and I love hearing you say that because I think, at least when I was younger, in my mind, it was like, I'm going to play trumpet, I'm going to get a degree, and I'm going to be gigging and full-time trumpet, and it's going to be great. And it's like, well, eventually, like you had to work 7 days a week in a bakery to survive for how many years did you have to do that for?
Oh, I only did that for a year or two, and then things started opening up, and then Diva got more busy, and I started subbing on Broadway a lot. So I was able to, and in club dates, I started doing a lot of club date work, did a few salsa bands. Just don't pigeonhole yourself, and you'll be okay. You just do everything you can. If they call you for a salsa gig, you might not have ever done a salsa gig. You'd say, yeah, I'll be there. I'll do it. That's how you do it. I've never done a Broadway show. Okay, I'll be there. I've never done a club date. Sure, I'll show up. You want me to do the ceremony too? Well, I don't know how to play piccolo trumpet, but I'm going to get a hold of one and I'm going to learn it real, for you. I'll do that. You just pretty much say yes to everything you can, and that's your education. That's your professional induction into the business, and that's how you get your chops, and I mean chops wide by all your bag of tricks. That's how you learn the stuff, and that's paying your dues, and everybody has to pay their dues at some point. Nobody gets out free. You might get a break for a little while, but everybody has to pay their dues. So if you're impatient, then you're going to have a tough time. But if you understand that going in, and that's part that they don't explain to you in school, is that it's going to take a long time to get into a scene. You might, like I said, you might get a lucky break here or there, but eventually you're going to have to pay, and everybody pays them.
And that's why I love what you're saying. In school, it's like, I never heard like, it's going to take a minute, or like you're going to have to do this.
I mean, you remember school is it's a bubble, right? It's a very controlled bubble, and it's an academic bubble. We have teachers that are teaching, and many of them love what they do, and some of them don't. Some of them are doing it because they're trying to pay their rent too. That's their bakery job. Everybody. but think about how many people graduate from music school. Let's just say trumpet players every year across the country. There's got to be hundreds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if the professionals are having a hard time making a living, then why are all these 100 people just jumping on the scene going to suddenly be able to support themselves? It's false information, quite honestly. And I honestly think they should be teaching classes about that in college, about how to go out there and get the gigs, or how to get your number out, or how do you behave on a gig, because they don't teach that. How do you play in a big band section? I don't hear a whole lot of that going on in college either. I work with a lot of young players in all kinds of different bands that might be really decent soloists, good up and coming soloists, have no idea how to play in a section, and they're terrible at it. And it's not a diss, nobody ever taught them. And so that's a problem. And I also meet a lot of young trumpet players that come out of school that don't play their horns very well, but they can play licks, but they don't play their horns well. So they get in these 4-hour club dates, and they're dead in half an hour because they have no idea how to play at that level and at that intensity. And so it's a big disservice, if I'm being honest, if you ask me, that if you're paying all this money to go to college, thousands of dollars a semester, and you're not even learning how to play your horn, that's a problem, because that's a disservice to the student, because that's a rude awakening when they get out. And now you've got 4 years you got to go try and make up in basic musicianship and basic pedagogy. You're already behind. It doesn't matter if you can play, a gazillion licks. If you can't get through a half an hour of a club date, who's going to hire you?
Exactly. Yeah. Those club dates are like, I remember doing some of the first ones, and I'm like, whoa, this is a lot. I have to pay myself more.
Yeah, they're all different, and every gig you do. I mean, I have trouble now because I play so many shows. When I go out to play lead, I've got to actually, it's hard because that muscle is not as strong as it used to be, because I don't do it as much. So when I go out to play lead, I've got to actually start preparing for it now weeks in advance, because it's just a different kind of playing than show playing. Everything is different.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another, that's actually another question. So like, so you've been doing everything, you can play all these different styles and genres, and you get called for so many things. Would you say that lead playing is what the skill you're most known for?
Probably, yeah.
And how do you, being a lead player myself, like how do you keep your chops in good enough shape so when that call comes, you can deliver on what people are expecting?
Well, when I was younger, it was a lot easier because I just was playing. I was in the army 21 years doing lead work, and that's all I did was played lead for 21 years. So it wasn't a problem. I was always locked and loaded, ready to go. I was wound, ready to just let it go. Now, as I've retired from the army, I don't do it 7 days a week like I did. So now I play shows, which is a different animal, because you get to wear in-ears. So when you get to wear in-ears, you're under a microscope in your head all the time. You can hear every single thing. When you're playing in a big band, you don't always have that luxury. In fact, you fall victim to the halls. Some halls are very difficult to hear in. Some halls are very easy. And so some days you just struggle just to get the notes out of the horn, because you're fighting a monitor situation, or, different acoustics. And at that point, this is why your fundamental playing has to be solid, because at those points and in those situations, you have to fall back into the sound that you have in your head, and being able to back off and play where you play. And that's the biggest mistake we make as trumpet players, is trying to muscle the hall and playing outside of our heads. So if we have a good grip on the sound of the instrument as a whole, then we can back off and we can play. When I say play inside our heads, it just means backing off on volume and playing where you know that you have control over the instrument. And when you get into situations where when you overplay like that, that's where you expose all of your shortcomings. And so for me, playing big band music is the hardest thing for me to keep, like I said, to keep up now, because I do play in a show all the time, and I have myself monitored in my in-ears, and I don't have to worry about that. For me, playing big band music is the hardest thing I do now because I have to stop. I have to put in extra time on the horn, away from the shows, acoustically, and it's very difficult to recreate playing lead trumpet in your living room without a whole big band there. And that's probably the biggest challenge that I have now.
And that makes sense. Yeah, if you're not doing it as much. Going back, so you played lead trumpet for the Army Blues and the Jazz Ambassadors, correct?
That's right.
And so can you walk us through the decision behind that of, why you ended up auditioning for those groups and at what point in your career was that?
So I auditioned for first of all, those groups, you're kind of you just have to be fortunate in a way to even get to audition because people get those gigs and they stay in them for 20 and 30 years. So they rarely open up. So I was fortunate that it did open up during the time where I was eligible to audition. So that was very fortunate for me. So you are playing a team. That's the time game. That is just a luck kind of thing. You could be a great player and those gigs aren't open. If nobody's going to leave the gig, you can't audition for it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Timing is important. And when I chose to audition for the Army Blues, it was because I had been working in New York for several years. And I was really frustrated because I was subbing on a lot of Broadway shows and I was doing club dates and everything. On all the Broadway shows, I always did a good job. I'm not one to toot my own horn, so to speak, but I did do a good job. I never got a note as a sub on any Broadway show. I came in, I sounded just like the regular, and I was working a lot. And the frustrating thing for me was that after so many years, guys were coming into town. They were doing okay, and they were getting the call for the chair holder before I was. But I had been there longer. I was doing a great, and that told me that something else was going on. And I honestly believe that it was because I was a woman. Period. I don't know how any other way, but this is back in the 90s and it was a different time. There weren't many. Lori Frink was alive still then and she was playing, but I don't know that she had ever been a lead chair holder in one of her shows. I think she'd always gotten called for third or second, and she was a great player, and that was just too bad. And so when the opportunity for the Blues came around, they called to ask if I'd be interested in audition. And the first time I got the call, I just hung up the phone. My husband was an ex-British Royal Marine. He's like, no, I'm not going back to the military. There's no way. And so I ignored the call, and then they called again a couple weeks later, a week later, whatever, and I took the call mistakenly. I didn't recognize the number. And they kept me on the phone for a couple hours and started to think, wow, this sounds like a pretty good gig. And so that's how I auditioned for that gig. And honestly, the thing that appealed me the most about it was that I would get paid the same amount of money as the men were getting paid. Because in the Army, you get paid by your rank. You don't get paid. You get the promotion. You all get the same. It doesn't matter if you're a man or woman across the board. I thought, well, this is a living as a woman and get the same amount of pay and support my future family. And that was why I did it. I was luckily I won the audition, and then that's where I went, and it worked out nicely for me. And I got to play all the time. I got to play with some great players. The band was the Army Blues of the early 2000s was a great band. It was a fantastic band. It was just I can't say enough good things about it. I had a great experience doing that.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate to talk to so many people: Brian MacDonald, Josh Kaufman, Kevin Burns, Ali Albrecht, like so many of those players, and many across the field bands as well. And I've just been kind of convinced more and more that the military route is one of the best ways you can go as a musician because of all of the benefits, the pay, despite like inflation or COVID and stuff. Like there's so many benefits to that gig. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how those benefits helped you in your career?
By definition, the military is probably the most professional musician job that you can get. I mean, you're getting a salary. It doesn't matter if I go to work or not, I get paid. I have full benefits, health benefits. My children were born in Army hospitals. My health insurance, even after as a retiree, I have a decent health program because of the military. At that time, there was the GI Bill, the post 9/11 GI Bill came out, which allowed my son to go to college for free because it was transferable. My daughter will go to college for free because her father was also active duty and got that same benefit. So that alone is worth so much. The medical benefits of being able, it's socialized medicine. People get scared of the word socialism, but in the military it works. It's not ideal, but I don't know of any ideal system anywhere. Sometimes the waits are longer, but it's paid for. And that's a huge perk, especially nowadays. Like I said, I don't need to state anything politically. I don't know what the climate is now in the military. I don't know if it's the same, but for when I was there, it was probably the best gig I could have asked for.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so how long were you in the Blues before deciding to audition for the Jazz Ambassadors?
I was at the Blues for 12 years.
12 years. Okay. And what was the reason for you to audition for the Jazz Ambassadors then?
My daughter's father was also in the Army band, and we needed a different schedule, and it just worked out for me to audition. I won the Jazz Ambassadors audition and just moved over. And my pay didn't change. I just changed units, My job changed a lot, but my pay didn't change. At that point, when you have 12 years in the cement kind of hardens, you gotta get to your 20. You know what I mean? It's like you can do anything to get to that 20, and that's what I decided to do. I decided to go ahead and take that risk and go out on the road for the last 8 years on and off. It ended up being a good decision for me.
Okay, great. That makes sense. And I remember Kenny had said that you are the first ever and the only lead trumpet player between the two bands in the history of either group.
Yeah,
that you've been in both. That's awesome. That's incredible to be able to say.
Like I said, I've been pretty fortunate.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what was, for those who are considering like auditioning for the military and trying to get into one of these bands, what's the difference between the Ambassadors and the Blues, and how does that impact somebody's decision and which one they're auditioning for if they're trying to audition for both?
The field band is exactly what it. Let me back up. The Blues are part of the Army band, which is Pershing Zone in Washington D.C., and their mission is to support the National Capital Region primarily. So in the Army band, the big overall umbrella of the Army band, you have the Blues, which is the 18-piece big band. You have the concert band, which is I can't even tell you the numbers anymore, but it's typical concert band numbers. You had an orchestra, a small orchestra. They have a men's chorus, which is very, very good. I think now it's a mixed chorus. I think one of the commanders changed it to a mixed chorus. And then you had a rock band called Downrange, which was more public outreach than anything. And then you have the Army band, which is a ceremonial band, which one of their biggest missions is taking care of ceremonies at Arlington Cemetery and other kinds of diplomatic events that come up around the National Capital Region. So they send the ceremonial band out for that. Will it be an arrival of a diplomat, like a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown, just different various functions around Washington D.C. where you need military support, music support, lots of different things at the ceremony. But the primary mission of the ceremonial band was funerals at Arlington Cemetery. And at the time that I got in we were burying a lot of the World War II veterans, because it just happened to be the timeline. And it comes in waves. They get really busy during these certain, like then the Korean vets, and then the Vietnam vets, and then now we're getting into some of the more recent wars where we're having to inter more and more veterans, and that's a big mission of theirs. Now, the Army Blues would work as the Blues when we could, but we still were a supportive group in that overall picture. So if there was a lot of ceremonies that came in, then we would shut the Blues down to go support ceremonies. So I did a lot of funerals out in Arlington Cemetery, whether it's just me going out there with a trumpet or a bugle and playing taps, or sometimes with a full honor funeral band. I did a lot of those. And that, if you're talking about headspace, that can be difficult if you're not prepared for it. People have to get kind of numb to that, because when you're burying people every day, 3-4 times a day, it can be kind of a downer, and you see some sad stuff. And I did certainly see a lot of sad things while I was there, but I felt like that was a very important part of my job, and I'm very proud that I did do that. Even though it was hard, I'm proud that I was able to inter a lot of soldiers with honors. That makes me feel good. And when I went over to the Jazz Ambassadors, they're part of the field band, and that's exactly what that word means. They go out in the field. So our mission was to tour and to go out into the grassroots and be kind of a conduit between the public and the Army, and to wear the uniform, to play music at the highest level, so that when these people could go into these concerts and see the uniform, they could relate to maybe their son or daughter is out serving in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever they might be, and they can say, well, I'm proud of that, because look at this level of art that these soldiers are bringing to me. And if that's the level that the Army operates at, then I can feel good about my soldier son or daughter, representing the country, doing whatever they do, because I know they're doing it at the highest level. And that was kind of our mission.
Yeah, that's great. And so after 20 years, retire, because that's when you get your pension, that's when you get the benefits and everything for the rest of your life. I know some people continue on in their career and continue to advance and rank and leadership and whatnot. What was your decision behind that, of retiring at 20 instead of trying to continue on to 30?
Well, I retired actually 3 months short of my first anniversary, and it's simple. I was broken. I broke my body. I took my physical fitness requirements very seriously. I was an avid runner. I worked out all the time because what they don't tell you when you go into the Army field, or they say it really quietly, kind of like that, or they put it in small prints as they tell you that your backup job is you're an MP. And so, if the shit really ever hits the fan, they don't need a band, they need MPs.
Yeah.
So we've never had to do that. Although at the Pentagon on 9/11, we did go into the Pentagon and we were part of the search and rescue. We were part of the recovery mission. We were down there on site. I wasn't. I was pregnant at the time, but all my peers were down there. We're making name tags. We had some of our guys that were actually in the building helping with some of the rough stuff. So in times of conflict and crisis, there's a good chance you won't be a musician. But we haven't hit that yet. I say knock on wood. Ever since 9/11 have we ever come that close. So I think it's still a pretty safe job, but there is that possibility. That being said, I did take my physical fitness very seriously. I was always prepared fitness wise for anything they might throw at me. And after 20 years of running miles and miles and miles and doing a gazillion push-ups and then even being part of the ceremonial band and marching through, people don't understand how hard that is to march. They think it's really easy because you're just kind of going slow. No, you guys are those guys tear their bodies up. They're marching on uneven ground every day. They twist ankles, they hurt their feet, they get it's really difficult to stand still in 90-degree heat for half an hour at a time. That hurts your back. It hurts your knees. It hurts those guys really. I don't think anybody really understands except for them how physically difficult it is to be part of that ceremonial unit. And so the Army is physically demanding. You can get by with doing less, but I don't know why you would want to, because if the crisis ever happens, I don't want to be unprepared.
Yeah.
So I took it very seriously. So quite honestly, I just broke. I needed to go. I wanted to have a life after the Army. I didn't want
to. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, what are some other things that you could say about being in the military bands that are like that young players should also consider? We've talked about all these benefits and how great it is, and then you've talked about the physical fitness side of it and just like how exhausting it can be. What are some other things that's like, hey, well, keep in mind if you get a military gig, this is part of it?
Well, I don't think I need to say the quiet part out loud. Look at the world. We're in a conflict right now. Nobody knows what that's going to lead to. There's talk about drafting. There's talk about a lot of things right now. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm glad I did my time. I'm glad I did it when I did because I didn't have to worry about that. But if you're considering a career in the military music program, you need to think about those. You need to be okay with that. You need to be okay with being told that you're going to go, you might not be playing an instrument. That might be a reality right now. Like I said, I've never been in this situation and none of us have, so we don't know. Just be able to understand that there's a lot more to being in the military right now than just going out to Arlington and playing some funerals. There's a lot of other things. And for that to understand that, you would probably have to talk to somebody who's actually there. And I would recommend talking to them off record.
Right.
Because you can't freely speak about these things in the military. You're not allowed to have a political opinion publicly anymore. So all the social media stuff that you might be really highly involved in when you go into the military, that goes away. Because you could still do it, but you're going to get in trouble. You just can't be that guy because they don't want a conflicted army. They just don't want that. You need to be, when the mission comes down, you need to be ready to move and you need to be ready to go. So if you're okay with that, great. If not, you want to think twice about it. But one great thing is, if you're young and you're looking for a gig and the opportunity, the timing works out and you can win an audition, think about it because you're getting paid to stay in shape. You're getting paid a paycheck as soon as you go off to boot camp. You're getting a paycheck. And that's important right now. You're getting your health care taken care of. I don't think the retirement plan is the same as it used to be. When I was in, you just had to do your 20 and you got your pension. Now there's a blended retirement system that where I think if you go in even for like 10 years, you can still get something out of it. Before you couldn't, you had to do 20, but now it's called a blended retirement system where they pay into it. And if you get out after 5 years, 10, I don't know if there's a minimum you have to do to collect off that, but you can do less than 20 and still get something back, which is good. And when you're a veteran, you have veteran status. For you and your dependents, your spouse becomes your dependent. even though there may not be. My husband, Kenny Rampton, is a completely self-made, professional musician, but he's considered my dependent by the military. So that means he has an ID and he can go use, I still use Shop at the Commissary, which is tax-free. I fill my car up on post, which is cheaper gas. I have access to the veterinarian, to the framing, all these little things that you don't think about that I now have access for the rest of my life, and him too, because he's my dependent, and my children as well. So there's a lot of perks that go in that come out of if you can do it. Again, I'm not active duty now. It's a different time. I don't tell anybody they should take a gig, and I don't tell anybody not to take a gig, but be aware, do your homework. There's a lot of unknowns there now that I can't answer.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's super helpful. That makes a lot of sense. I think there's so many benefits to it. And it's like, yeah, those little things of then I'm like, that's great too. Like, I didn't think about that. So yeah, overall, it's like, I think that's one of the best ways to go right now. But it's also what you're bringing up about just the world right now and everything. Like, that's also a good thing to consider, and some things I wasn't aware of, which is, yeah, that's super helpful.
Well, it's not just about the military. I mean, let's take it out of the context of the military right now. The whole world is changing, and we have AI right now going on. And my son is, he's going to be 25 this year, and he's gone to school and gotten a degree, and he's finding now that degrees are worthless, because they are hiring AI to do these entry-level jobs, and that's a problem when you go out and you spend several $100,000 in some cases on a college education. You get out to only find out that an AI programmer or whatever is going to take your job. That's not good. And so having this discussion with my son several times about and my daughter who's getting ready to go to college soon, get your hands on something, do something, be interested in something that only a human can do. If that means hands-on jobs, manual jobs, blue-collar jobs, things that, I don't know what that exactly looks like. In music, we've been okay so far, but there's a lot of, artificially produced music too. And so be smart, think ahead. Don't just think about the next year, the next 2 years, the next 4 years. Think about the next 10 years, the next 15 and 20. Because the world is changing so fast, and I would never say never, right? I mean, you just don't know. Like, there was a point in my life where, like I said, my husband said, no, we're never going back to a military lifestyle. And here I am 21 years out of, a career in the military. You just never know. Don't say never. No, don't ever. And that's another bigger lesson for, anything you do, whether it's music or not. You never burn a bridge, because you just never know what the world's going to turn into. So you do everything you can not to burn a bridge.
Yeah, 100%, because there's so many, you never know when you're going to have to cross that chasm again.
That's right. You never know who's going to show back up in your life. And that's another thing that's been really proven to be true in my many years, is that people that I met in college that I thought, I'm going to get out of here and I'll never see them again. No, they pop up. They always do.
Oh, that's good to know. I'm going to add that somewhere in the book. It was like, they're going to show up again at some point. And so after the military, obviously you lived in the DC area and whatnot. So then you got out and decided to move back to New York, get back into the scene.
Well, I didn't, after the military, I was retiring around the end of the pandemic, and we were kind of shut down as a field band because we couldn't tour because the world was closed down. I was actually, this is what I'm talking about. As an active duty soldier, I was stocking the commissary with groceries every day for months, because that's where we were needed. You just never know. We weren't playing and we weren't touring, but we were stocking groceries. And at some point we were delivering medications for the pharmacy. You never know what they need. You're in the Army. You belong to the Army. You don't have as much control. But when I was retiring from the military, I didn't know what I was going to do, but the pandemic was raging. So I went back to school and I got a phlebotomy certification and became a phlebotomist. And so right after I retired, I worked at a blood bank for a year and a half or so, drawing people's blood and plasma and everything I could do because I wanted to help. I wanted to do something to be part of the solution, with the pandemic. And so I did that. And then while I was doing that, I got a call from a friend of mine, another person who showed up after 30 years of not seeing them, and said, hey, I'm contracting a show. Would you like to do it, the development? I said, sure. And so I ended up doing the development. That was Mr. Saturday Night starring Billy Crystal. I went up to to Massachusetts for a development, and did that. And then when it moved to New York, because I'd done the development, I got first choice in doing the show. So I did that. I thought I was just going to do that show and go back to the hospital. But while I was doing that show, another show came in for development, and that was Some Like It Hot. And they said, "Hey, well, we're contracting this too. You did that. You did a good job. Would you like to do Some Like It Hot?" And I said, "I would love to do that." And that's how it started. One thing just kind of led to another, led to another. But that's what I mean. That's how the business works. One door closes, another opens. And I didn't really make the conscious choice to move to New York. It just kind of these doors kept appearing and opening. And so I just kept going through them until eventually, I met Kenny, and we ended up getting married, and I moved up here. And then I've been doing this I'm on my fourth show now, and I've been doing fine. And so it just, I think one of the hardest things about being in school and being a young person is trying to have it all figured out. And I've realized that you really don't have to have anything figured out. You really don't. And it's kind of a freeing way to live. It's a little scary, but if you're smart and if you take care of those relationships and you try not to burn any bridges, then you're going to be fine. And if you have a good supportive family, you can lean on in times, if nothing else, just to call them up and say, "Hey, just need to talk." That's support systems are important. And so yeah, it's just, you just never know. Don't be too worried about having a grand plan, because almost 95% of the time the plan doesn't work out anyways.
Yeah.
The plans are what is the saying? Plans are what you make when you're dealing with life and you're going through life. Best made plans, you're still going through life. You still got to deal with life first.
Yep, 100%. And it sounds like that's been the case for you throughout your whole career.
Yeah, it has.
As we've been talking, it's like, oh, because of this, and well, you're doing this, and now we're pivoting to this, and it's like,
right, and that's what it's important to take advantage of every situation, playing wise or whatever, that even if he's not playing, your friend has an opportunity to do something that you never thought you'd do, go do it. You just don't know. It might be nothing, but you'll remember it, and you might learn something from it that has nothing to do with music, but that you might take that lesson into something that is music related, or it might inspire you to write something, or it might inspire you to to deal with a person in a different way. These are all experiences, and that's what life is having experiences. So any chance you have to have a different experience or something, even if it's something that you never saw yourself doing, go do it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great.
Especially when you're young and you don't have kids and mouths to feed or whatever, you're free. Just do it.
Yeah, it's a whole different ball game when you have kids or have somebody you need to take care of, as opposed to
That's
just
right.
yourself. So yeah, that's been the case for me as well. And everything's been great. It's been working out, but it's like, okay, I have to think about if I'm going to do this gig, if it's going to only pay this much, or different things because of different family relationships and whatnot. So yeah, totally understand.
But sometimes we do gigs not for the money, right? We do them for the experience. Because I've done many gigs where I didn't make any money, but I got to play or stand next to somebody that it was important for me to hear them, or I needed to meet them. I needed to. It's not always about the money, and that's those are the money sacrifices we make as freelancers, as gig workers. You just never know, and you never know who's going to show up at your gigs either. You never know who's going to. Yeah, I just played at Birdland on Friday night. I fill in sometimes. I don't do it very often because I like to leave those gigs for the younger guys that really need the money. And not that I don't need the money, they need that experience. They need that for a young guy in New York who's just recently married, has a baby. It's everything to make $100 so he can buy diapers. My kids are gone. They're out of diapers. I don't have to worry about that. But somebody else does. And so I don't do those gigs a lot. But this last Friday I did do that. And who's sitting at the bar? Randy Brecker. He comes in and he sits in. You just never know who's going to walk in.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So we can talk a little bit about Broadway as we're wrapping up here. But so playing with Broadway, I think some of my first experiences were playing in the high school pit orchestra when we did, White Christmas and Les Mis and Music Man. And like, it was a totally different experience of like sitting there, like we're not just playing music. I'm waiting for these actors, and then been 10, 15 minutes not playing, and then they have to come in on a high note, cold, and like, oh, this is a different skill. Like, I have to figure this out. And I'm like so grateful for those experiences, because those have led to other opportunities later on professionally. But it seems like there's less and less of that available for for kids and young musicians in school, whether it's high school or college, there's really not much training that I've seen, at least, for opportunities like that. And so how can somebody best prepare for Broadway chops? So like you said, it's a different animal than playing lead trumpet or playing solo stuff. So what are some ways that young players can prepare for those opportunities?
Well, first of all, I would advise everybody who's interested in playing shows. I can't tell you how many people that I meet that want to come and play and they want to do Broadway. And I say, okay, well, what's your favorite cast recording? And they can't tell me one that they've listened to. If you're not listening to the music, you're never going to play it properly. So there's a certain, kind of flair about Broadway. Broadway is, let's just face it, it's ridiculous. Everything about it is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous people standing up on stage singing and dancing about life. That's not life. That's ridiculous. Even the pit orchestra has to be. It's not ridiculous, but everything is exaggerated, in my opinion. That's how I approach it. Anyways, if you're going to play, and this is where all the other gigs come in handy. Why it's important to take every gig. You need to go out and play club dates. You need to go play salsa gigs. You need to go play dance gigs. Any kind of thing that you can, because Broadway is made up of all of that. There's a little bit of every flavor in a Broadway show. So that's where you get those tools. And then so when you get into Broadway, when you're rehearsing and you see, oh, this goes into a Latin feel. Okay, well, I know how to play that. Or this goes to the show I'm doing now has a bunch of little blips. And so if I'd never played a club date, I wouldn't know how to play that music. But I know how to play that. I know how that's supposed to be articulated. I know how that's supposed to sound. And you just have to switch gears really fast. If you only play one style, one way all the time, you're never going to sound like a Broadway show player, because you're just going to play flat, not literally flat, but you're just going to play this. You're just going to play notes on a page. And music is not just notes on a page. No, music is so much more. And that's where you separate the great players from the good players, is the people that can milk and get all that out of all the music out of the notes on the page is where you're going to find the best player. And you get that from going out and playing as many different kinds of music as you can. Cruise ships, you play all the big band stuff, and you turn around and you play show music, and then you go out and you might play a Dixieland set. You're doing all kinds of things. That's where you're paying your dues. That's where you're cutting your teeth and learning. That's why that's important. And Broadway, when I say it's ridiculous, is because we just become an extension of what's going on stage. And that's, the consistency you're talking about, sitting out for you might sit for 20 minutes and have to come in on a high note. Well, if you're not practicing coming in on high notes at home, you're never going to be good at it. I mean, everything you do at home is preparation, I say, in the practice room for what you do on stage. So I have a lot of people that come to me, kids that say, oh, I just don't understand how you can do this without missing. Well, I practice it. I practice sitting in front of, a music stand and playing. It's like I call them my free throws. I do my free throws, sit in front of a music stand, and I practice one note over and over and over and over again until I can't miss it. And then when I go into the show, well, why would it be hard for my mind? Because I've done that literally 100 times in the last day in my practice room. So why is it any different when I walk into the show? It's not. It's right here. And so if I can get rid of, if I can make the physical response, automatic, then it's way less for me to think about. And I guarantee you that the hardest thing you're going to deal with in your entire career is going to be your own mind. So if we can get rid of all the physical limitations by making them as automatic as possible, then it frees our mind to deal with the real crap, the real stuff that's really keeping us back, and it's all in our head.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And what you're talking about is fundamentals, and I've always known, fundamentals. You need to get fundamentals down. But thinking about it like that, especially that analogy of free throws, I'm like, whoa, that's rocked my world just now. This is wow.
It's all they are. They're free throws. And I will I'll pick a note, and I teach this to my mentees too. I have a group of mentees that I teach, that I work with them every week. We do that. We just talk about one note. It can be, you can change it up every week. Just make it one note. Maybe it's a G on top of the staff. Maybe it's a C sharp on top of a second ledger line. Just pick one and just and just do it over and over again. Methodical. It's free throws. There's free throws for the trumpet. That's what I call it.
Yeah.
And it works wonders. And then once you can quiet your mind, and then you get on the gig and you see it, and you're like, you don't even think about it. It's like, well, this is just like I practice. Why would I? And then if you miss it, well, then here's the problem.
Yeah.
You can do it 100 times in the practice room. So
yeah. Wow, I mean, those are the kind of things that I'm always looking for, these little golden nuggets of how to, and that's one of them that for me just now I'm like, wow, that's so. I wish that I would have been taught more that stuff of hey, when you're playing this big band chart or a show, this is going to happen. How do you do it? Let's practice it like this. And maybe I would have gotten to that. I had an injury halfway through college and had to stop playing for 8 months, and the rest of my time was rehabilitating and stuff. So we can focus on a lot of other things. But I'm like, man, if only I'd known some of this stuff. That like is so helpful.
Yeah, well, injuries are another thing. I've had to work through them myself, so they're when you're not playing because of an injury, you have plenty of other things you can work on, that's for sure. But fundamentals is the key to everything. And I think that's something that we forget. We get out of college and we say, I don't have to be in the practice room anymore because I got my degree. No, this is the time you get to practice now more than ever, because you're not getting called right away. You got nothing but time. If you're trying to be a freelancer, this is what you should be doing. You should be doing your fundamentals. You should be constantly, the fundamentals never stop. And that, I think, bothers a lot of people because they get in the practice room and they're, oh God, I got to do these. You should look forward to that, because when you really practice fundamentals with intensity, you get better really fast. You really do. And if you're approaching your practice session like it's a chore, then you need to reframe how do you think about your practicing, because that's where you're getting the work done. That's where you're doing the work.
Yeah.
So you need to have an important relationship, a good relationship with your practice sessions.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. With Broadway, I know we've talked a little bit about you got a call, and then you show up, you do a good job, and then okay, contractor said, okay, I got another show coming up. You can do this and whatnot. And obviously, each show, I guess it depends on how long it goes for, but it's 8 shows a week, and so you're playing a lot. And whatnot. But it sounds like it kind of depends on that first show or that first subbing or whatever. It's like your first shot, and then if you biff it, you're out of luck for a long time. Is that more or less the case?
Not necessarily. It doesn't. I mean, it depends on why you might have had a bad show. Did you do a bad show because you didn't prepare, or did you do a bad show because you just missed a couple notes? Well, I can tell you right now that there's no perfect show. You plan on missing. You need to plan on missing some notes, because it's a high pressure gig, and it just happens. We're human. So it's not the mistakes that turn conductors or contractors away. It's when you don't do your homework or you're not prepared. You're stepping in holes. You're coming in wrong. You're missing entrances. You're coming in at the wrong tempo. You're getting ahead. You're not. That's what gets you fired from a Broadway show. It's not making the odd mistake once in a while, because everybody even the chair holders, we all make mistakes. That just happens. Even the conductors make mistakes. Sometimes they just space out and they miss a cue. It just happens. That's not a problem. What's a problem is when you don't do your homework and you don't take care of business, because again, we talked about this before. It's a business. You have to take care of your business. That's important. It's not just about playing trumpet. I know guys that are great players but will never hold a show because they can't be on time. Little things like that. Or I know guys that get shows and then they go into the subbing pool and they don't sub well because they don't prepare. They think, well, I'm just between shows, so I don't have to prepare. No, man, if you're going to sub, you still got to do a good job, even if you're between shows, because that's how you not get called again as a sub. I mean, if I'm going to send somebody and they're not going to do their homework, I'm not sending them again. It's as simple as that, because that's a reflection of me and my chair. And if I'm not sending somebody who's professional, then, that's a reflection on my way I do my business. You always as a sub, you must do your homework. And if you don't, and you don't get called back, then don't be surprised, because you just didn't do the work. It's like college, man. It's no different. It's just an extension. You don't do the work for your test, you're going to fail the test. This is your test.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Well, and then I think what was interesting what you said is how who you send also reflects on you. Like if you send somebody consistently who isn't getting it done, you're only sending people who are not rising to the level. Like you might not get the next show, maybe.
But it's a disservice to the entire production, right? I mean, especially on a lead trumpet player. If I'm sending a guy in or a girl and that's not going to do a good job, you have to remember that there's people on stage that are relying on things being exactly the same way every night, every show. They don't want change. When you do something wrong, when you trip a note, that affects them. And if they hear that, and so it's not our job is to support them. It's a support role. Although I would argue that the orchestra is somewhat of a character in the show, because they call it's a musical. It's not a costumical. It's not a wigical. It's not a mythical. It's a musical. They rely on us. And they need us to be as consistent as possible. And so if we screw something up, they hear that. And we don't want to have them crash on stage. That's the worst thing that can happen, is you screw up an actor. So it's important. You have to think about the overall production. When I first came onto the scene, I heard there was a group of guys that would say, yeah, I never send somebody better than you. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? I want them to be better than me. I want them to be great players, because I don't want the actors to know that I'm gone. Because as soon as the best compliment a sub can get is like, I didn't know the regular was out today. that's the best compliment a sub can get.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, and that makes sense. As a sub, but obviously, like, there's the preparation of part that I've heard of. You learn the music, you learn the style, you sit and observe the show, and you have the conductor and whatnot. But if you have like a different core sound than the chair holder, like, how can you step in and make it seem like the chair holder isn't gone and get that
Well,
compliment?
that's important. Even if your sound is different, I mean, that's not such a big deal. I mean, it's ideal that you really want to sound like the regular as much as you can. I wouldn't change anything I was doing to try to sound like, as far as my production of my sound, I wouldn't do anything like that. But I would sure as heck make sure I'm not missing any notes. I'm not missing any entrances. I'm cutting notes off where I'm supposed to cut off. I'm not misleading the section or the conductor in any way.
Mm,
So
okay.
it's just play as much like the regular as you can.
Okay, that makes sense. That's great. Okay. No, this has been awesome. Okay, as we're wrapping up, talking about your career and all these different experiences and whatnot. Is there anything you know now that you wish you would have known when you were younger?
Yes and no. No, because if I knew everything, then I wouldn't have taken the path I've taken. So I like to think that I had to learn these things. I think the thing I would just be more conscious about is just not being so worried about, every little, mistake I've ever made on a stage, because we all make them. I get pretty uptight. Historically, I've been pretty uptight about I've always felt a lot of pressure as a female to never make a mistake. And when I make a mistake, I'm pretty hard on myself. And if I could have known back then that it really didn't matter as much as I thought it did, I probably would have had a much nicer time. But, we're all our own worst enemies in so many ways. So I think just trying to be gentler on ourselves with the path that we're on, and understanding that where we are is where we're supposed to be, accept that with all the flaws and mistakes, and just always knowing that, the goal is to get better as not just a player, but as a person and the big world, and trying not to hold space for the negativity, and it's going to be okay. Not, like I said earlier, don't get too wound up in our future, because none of us know where we're going, and none of us know where the world's going right now. So what a waste of energy to get so sucked into that. Just try to live one day, 1 hour, literally sometimes it's 1 hour at a time, and not be quite so hard on ourselves for being human.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that. I actually had one last question that I was thinking of as we were talking about. What would you say to any young female trumpet players out there who are wanting to make it happen? Obviously, it's a different time now than when you were starting, and Lori Frink and these people, but now we're seeing people like Grace Fox, Summer Camargo, Kellen Hannis, and others who are paving the way as well. But what would you say to those young players who are looking at these past female players like Bria Skonberg, Kiku Collins, so many of these other players, and they're like, and they've been an inspiration. What would you say to them about trumpet and career and life and just anything?
I think, honestly, one of the biggest problems that female trumpet players are having is isolation. And to combat that, I've started kind of a support group for female trumpet players, and we're very new. We don't even have a name yet, but I've opened up a community of young female students and professionals to meet online once a month, where they can talk to each other, because I think that isolation is what hurts most young female trumpet players. They find they're the only one in their school. They're one of maybe one or two. They get isolated. They deal with all the pressure all alone. And the problem is that we're not all alone. But we're very disconnected. So with this group, I'm trying to connect us. So if they're out there and they're feeling alone, find me online, find Kellen, find Grace, they all know about this. They're part of this community, and reach out, because we're here to support one another and to connect you, so that you see that you're not alone. And I think there's a lot of power in that. And, I'll use this opportunity to say that to you in this somewhat public forum, is that we are here. And we're looking for you to reach out to us, so that we can connect each other and we can help be a support group, because there's a lot of issues that women trumpet players have that men don't have. And it's not trying to make us special, but they're real. There's things we deal with that men don't deal with. And that I think if I'd have known other women when I was in college, I might have had a much easier time. I think that's why we lose a lot of young women coming out of college that just stop playing is because I think they just don't want to deal with the crap anymore that they deal with. And the truth is that they're not dealing with it alone. So find your connection, hang on to it, and look for more connection because it's important.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And well, when you have a name for your group, please let me know so that I can share it and include it in the book, and would love to just get as many of these young female players connected as well, because I'm thinking of different students I've had and people that I know where they're the only ones and like they're great players. Like, yeah, if there's a way to connect, like I think you're spot on with the isolation thing. So would love to help out with that as much as possible.
And I appreciate that. And as soon as I don't know that we'll ever organize into a group, but we do meet once a month and we are in touch with one another offline so that we can, if somebody, and it doesn't even have to go through me. Like, so we've had some meetings where, where the women get together and they'll say, man, this happened to me. And all of a sudden, 10 hands go up. It's like, oh yeah, but they thought they were the only one, so we can talk about that. We can figure out what works in combating that. We can find out, get some better skills as far as, social skills that help them through that, or just knowing that they're not alone. There's a lot of power, and it's not just for women, it's for anybody. But if you're ever going through a problem, just knowing that you're not the only one going through it there's a lot of strength and power in that. And that's important to hang on to.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Well, thank you again so much, Liesl. This has been just so much fun to hear your story and about your experiences and just getting those little golden nuggets all throughout. And so I really appreciate you taking some time to chat.
Thanks for including me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too. Take care.